Okay, guys, so welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us in this opening session for the fourth module about audiovisual and media education. Today we have with us Javier Luque. Um, he will be the professor for today. He holds a degree in journalism and psychology from Universitat Rovira and Virgili in Tarragona and a master's in international journalism from Cardiff University. And he's currently working in as a head of digital communication at the International Press Institute in Vienna. So thank you, Javier, for joining us today. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself better and further. So thank you for joining us and go ahead.
Wow, thank you. Well, first of all, Albert, thank you very much for the invitation. I really appreciate it, and the
Of
opportunity
course.
to address this group of students, which I heard that you are in the final stages of submitting at least sort of an overview of your dissertation thesis, right? If I'm not mistaken. Um,
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. So, actually, I would like to hear from you, first of all. So, what's the like kind of if you can give me like a quick overview, of what you're thinking about, for your dissertation. Just a quick note on the presentation from Albert. I'm currently the head of digital media and online safety, and then I will let you know as soon as when you finished. As I said, I want to hear from you first, and then I'll go ahead and also introduce myself and what I do. So I will start, and also since we're going to be that little, I don't know if Georgie, you can also switch on, the camera whenever you feel comfortable, of course, huh? Because the visual cues. Hi, Georgie, how are you? Because the visual cues are always cool, to be honest, especially when we're in such a small group. So I will start like this in order of appearance in my screen. So Stephen, that's you. So can you briefly introduce yourself, if you're working, if you're not, and also to give me an overview of what's your dissertation about.
Hi Javier. My name is Stephen Kumar. I am actually based out of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I work as a on the business development for the university here in Canada. It's a business technology focused institution, relatively small, but still sort of quite. We have a flagship MBA program here. I have been associated with university and education for a decade now, and that's been sort of the area and focus like of my work so far. I took the master's program with the intent to sort of have a much deeper sort of perspective on as to what how communication and education can go hand in hand in
Hmm.
terms of having a much deeper impact in like lives of people. My the thesis work that I'm focusing on is going to be on how social media as an educational tool can actually have a like be used for as a learning tool, and at the same time how social media can be used in education and what sort of opportunities it kind of creates, and what will be like the associated threats and risks with it. So the research will sort of focus on a specific question whether can social media really facilitate and improve the learning process and make communication between students more effective and interesting, and also at the same time allow students to find the resources and materials. Are they able to build social connections, etc., networking, and you organize educational tool and so on. So that's been the kind of work that I've been sort of focusing on so far on this thesis work.
Well, pretty interesting. We'll actually talk about social media as well and how, but we'll look at the downside of social media in this case. But also, I would like to explore at the end of the presentation with all of you how we can actually yeah, um use the power of social media, to actually change the narrative and the storytelling of what we're going to be talking today, which is disinformation, and linked to also media literacy, but in a different perspective, in the sense that I will be focusing mainly on how we can investigate disinformation campaigns, and how, by exposing the certain components and elements that constitute a disinformation campaign, actually can be, an in itself an education tool for the audience of the news outlets. So, but before we take a deep dive into that, I would like to hear from you, Lily.
Hello. I'm Lily. I'm in Guangzhou, China. And my major in university is about education, but my work has no relationship with education. The reason why I choose this major in UAB, the two reasons. The first reason is I have two children. I want to know some new information about education. It is better for improve my um, co to stay with my children and how to improve the skills in new education. And the second reason is I have my dream. I have a dream. In China, there are many remote mountains. So I want to, after my children get up, grow up, I hope can educate in the remote mountainous areas of China. This is my dream.
Well, it's
Yeah,
it's 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 definitely a dream worth chasing or pursuing, to be honest. Absolutely. So, look, let me just quickly touch upon a couple of things that you just said. So, one, what I'll be sharing with you is like sort of a methodology that we've been developing at the International Press Institute, which is an international organization where I work, what I've been working for the last almost 12 years. My goodness, it's been lifetime. The best 12 years of my life, basically my 30s. And I would share with you the methodology that hopefully you can actually apply some of it, some components to the work that you are doing in media literacy. Okay, especially when we talk about school, and the power of the video and the power of the image, on that. So, as I said, at the end of this presentation, I would really, really like to spend some time with you discussing how we can better present these stories, and we will talk about a specific case study that we've been conducting and analyzing. Basically, it's a disinformation campaign against very well known and established fact-checking organization in Spain called Maldita. But I'll dive a little bit more into that later on. And with regard to the second item I wanted to touch upon, it's the mountains and the mountainous areas. So I'm just speaking to you from the Alps in Austria. I don't know if you can see. I'm literally in the middle of a farm, and
Oh,
I am connecting with you from really small village, around 1,100 meters of altitude. And yeah, I'm based in Vienna, generally speaking, but we're spending a few days here in the cabin in the woods, just to sort of switch off. So definitely highly recommended to, bring up your children and make them grow here. So congrats, and please chase that dream. Georgie,
okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Well, my name is Georgie, and as you already know, I'm from Russia, and I studied media there, and I did my undergrad and master's degree there, and it was in media, and I worked in plenty of media in Russia, and because of where I had to move, and I still work somehow in the media and marketing media, and I'm also doing my PhD about social dating apps and
Mm-hmm.
how people make their like branding there, what they post, how they post, what they would like to show, how they show their like wealth and stuff. It's really, really close to Marxism, but it is a different topic. But in this program, I'm doing a thesis about I call it like a student media collective.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to be a platform for students to get a hands-on experience in media without
Mm-hmm.
going to internships, because as far as I understand and as far as I see from different surveys, students are not fully satisfied with the experience they have during internships. And I want
Mm-hmm.
to create something that would be standalone but connected with universities in Barcelona,
Mm-hmm.
and how students can participate, create different kind of content with AI. And also, there is a kind of thing called mobile journalism. So,
Mm-hmm.
how they can use different apps on their phones, tablets, and stuff like that without having a big newsroom, and how they
Mm-hmm.
can create this content, assess this content, publish, and see how it goes from there. So I think it would be a very interesting addition to, educational process,
Mm-hmm.
because I also sometimes think about myself when I used to study in the university and I didn't have this experience. But when I
Mm-hmm.
was, in the market for a job,
Mm-hmm.
every job posting says like you have to have an experience.
Mm-hmm.
And how I'm going to get this experience if I don't have, I don't have a job. So this is like a
Mm-hmm.
paradox that I'm trying to solve here.
Yeah, it's a sort of entryway, right? A way into the market.
Yeah.
Confirm your speaking language. It sounds like you might have switched to a different language. Please update if you can. I don't understand what is it. Okay, sorry, I just got a pop-up from Zoom. But on that regard, on the use of technology to encourage students to look into, I mean, to work on media, to start using, so basically enhancing their digital media skills, right? Um, I find it really, really interesting, and I can connect you with a project and with a company. It's called Película. They're based here in Austria, but they've won several awards across Europe, and how they use technology in order to so in different media literacy projects. The one that I knew, for example, is that they've developed a AR, augmented reality escape room, and they go to different high schools, and they go to different they've been like visiting different universities as well here in Austria, and I found it very, very interesting. They also developed this kind of escape room with augmented reality. So they go with iPads. Basically, there's some sort of signs hanging around, around the classrooms, and escape room. It's called escape fake. So they need to put they force the students to put themselves in the shoes of of a journalist, and in order to identify what is real, what is fake, how to verify something, and so on. So I found it very, very interesting. I have a contact with them, so if you by any chance check their website and everything, if you find it that it's interesting, and that could be, and that you can learn something from their experience, I'm very, very happy to put you in touch with them.
That's super
Um,
helpful. Thank you.
yeah,
Also,
check it out. Pellicular, it's called. They have several things there. So let me then start about my work. First of all, let me ask, Albert, are you there? Are we good with regard to time and everything? I'm a little bit late. How's it
No,
going?
no, we're just fine. Yeah, we
Yeah,
have
we're fine.
plenty of time. Yeah, don't worry. Yeah,
Perfect. Thank you very much, Albert. Really
you're
appreciate it.
welcome. I'm just still trying to make this camera work, so sorry if I'm a little bit out, but I will be here in a few moments.
Perfect. So while Albert is still our big brother, sort of pullulating over here, I'm going to So what I want to focus today, let me go back to my first bachelor degree or licenciatura for those of you living in Spain was in psychology. Then my second bachelor was in journalism, and then I took a master's at Cardiff University on international journalism. And what I've been working, so I was a crime reporter for one of the biggest news stations in Spain and Latin America called Cadena Ser. I then moved to Los Angeles to do sports, and then I eventually ended up in the International Press Institute because they needed someone with sort of a background in multimedia skills, which include video. I've filmed 3 documentaries, but I've also worked on radio, etc., etc. So long story short is that when I landed in the International Press Institute, IPI, which is actually the oldest global press freedom organization in the world. This year, we're doing the 75th anniversary of the organization. It was, if you're checking for the website, it's called ipi.media. And I can tell you that, and that's the part of my title that is called Head of Digital Media and Online Safety. So a little bit of promo, Head of Digital Media. That part is that I've been managing the relaunch of the IPA website, which actually we've launched it today. So I've been working on this project for the last 10 months. But also I have another brand that it's part the online safety. That's the other hat. And what we actually, when I arrived at IPI, so IPI has different different areas of work. Right now we're working with small newsrooms, independent media, and trying to develop, some sort of sustainable revenue streams, especially in those newsrooms that and news the small news outlets that work on in dire circumstances. So we're talking about places like Latin America, but also we work a lot with Ukraine, with Russian media in exile. We work a lot with journalists coming out from Gaza, etc. Right? So that's a part. Then we have a brand like another area of work which is strictly press freedom, so strictly advocacy, right? And then we have a third area which is support independent journalism. And that's the area that I've been just focusing and working on for the last, as I said, like 11, almost 12 years. Basically, my expertise has been developed in investigating, analyzing, and understanding the patterns of online harassment. Back in 2014-15, when I started this work, basically attacks against journalists and independent news outlets, on social media were covered, or reported about on an anecdotal basis. So we decided to actually take a deep dive, a deep look into what was the phenomenon. So first, back in 2014, we actually needed to understand whether this was an issue or not, whether this was a press freedom issue or not. Now we know that actually journalists that feel threatened actually have these, suffer from this chilling effect, let's put it this way, that they are, and they self-censor themselves, which actually has a direct impact, on online on the possibility of the audience, of the students, of the public in general, to have access to an independent media and to independent information. So shout out also of what's going on, of course, over there in China. Canada, hopefully you're safe, but we have increasingly seen, attacks against Canadian journalists coming from propaganda machinery being, deployed in the US. Basically ahead of the elections in order to destabilize a little bit the country and polarize the public in general, Um, so what we've been doing first was back in 2014-15, I conducted fact-finding missions in Turkey, in Jordan. I was in different countries in South Africa as well. Definitely a lot of countries in Europe. So what we observed over the time is how the attacks by individuals, how the techniques that were being used by individuals to attack, specific journalists, to threaten, to intimidate, to discredit their work, have been increasingly used in a coordinated and organized manner by purveyors of disinformation, meaning by populists, by leaders of extremist movement, etc., etc., etc. So what we've decided is basically equip newsrooms, and equip journalists in order to investigate these phenomena. Let me just quickly share with you the presentation, because I think that actually will guide me a little bit over what we're going to be talking in a more like a structured manner. So let me see. View a slideshow. Are you there with me? Yeah. So you see the whole screen? Just give me a
Yeah,
thumbs up. Yeah.
all
Perfect.
good.
Thank you very much. Any question until now, or I should just walk a little bit farther and then open up for questions? Yeah, let's continue. Okay. So we're going to be talking about disinformation. And as I said, that's going to be the downside, but also what I'm going to be sharing with you, it's sort of frameworks, methodologies, and hopefully you will be able to extract, some sort of pattern or like common denominator so that you can actually adapt it to your current, either dissertation or your area of interests. When we're going to be, so today we're going to be talking about this information, but like that in a specific area of it, which is like as I said, the weaponization of online harassment techniques as part of broader disinformation campaigns to target the independent journalists. How they normally do that, as I said, through these intimidation tactics, such as doxing, such as bail threats. A lot of the things that we find, especially in Europe, are actually indirect threats that are not like open. And that's usually happening quite often, in places like Twitter, like Facebook, where the audience, it's way broader. Rather than, for example, in other smaller newsrooms, in other smaller apps like Telegram, like, um, 4chan, Gap, Getter, and so on, so on. I'm not going to get into details with that. But this is pretty important, like the coordinated smear campaigns. So how do they intimidate? How do they carry out these disinformation campaigns? Through coordinated smear campaigns to discredit their work. And this is what we're going to be looking at. Why they do that? So first of all, erode the trust on fact-based information across the different, audience, including students in schools, especially in high schools, and including students, in the university, and in general in the public. Why they first want to intimidate, bring a journalist into silence, plus on top of that, erode the trust of the audience in that journalist? Well, because they have a fertile ground then, where all the narratives and that they want to, plant, they will grow, uncontested and unchecked. Why does this matter? So why looking at attacks against journalists actually matters? So this is a survey that an organization that I work with as a partner called Factograph we conducted in 2023, which was, it's actually the first time that in Europe, fact checkers has been surveyed to understand the penetration of online harassment and the impact of online harassment across different fact-checking organizations in Europe. Most of them are, almost practically all of them have been, targeted by instances of online attacks, especially by political actors. Out of those, that 90%, 70% has been just basically sustained, targeted by sustained and prolonged coordinated attacks. And this is kind of what we have identified after, a lot of, many years actually investigating this kind of campaigns, which is kind of the life cycle of disinformation campaign targeting the media and journalists. So let me start first with the diagram. That's the graphic. Usually these disinformation campaigns start with, a prominent figure. It could be the president of a country, for example, in the case of Serbia, could be, a leader of an extremist movement. It could be a leader of a how do you say, of a military unit. In one of the case studies that, for example, we conducted in Turkey, where a unit of the special forces of the Turkey military were actually chasing online a Kurdish journalist in Diyarbakir, just to put you an example. So we have this prominent figure that actually points the finger on what is a target, right? And then we have this next concentric circle, this next layer, all this happening on social media of influential accounts that follow this prominent figure. And these influential accounts, what they do is that they generate the message of hate and hatred against the journalists, discrediting also the work that these the work of the news outlet, and just setting up the message that then will be further disseminated organically by the other concentric, by the biggest amount of accounts. Some of them include, we can, identify several of them that include bots as well, several campaigns, I mean. But then the message, the rumor, the lie that has been, disseminated, that has been created by this prominent figure, then actually expanded and further disseminated by hundreds of thousands, sometimes, of accounts. What happened is that, this rumor is then picked up by what we call legacy media, which is often pro-government media or media aligned with the extremist, ideology that they are representing. So all that basically, and they will start reporting on the rumors, disseminated on social media. So this account has said that on Twitter. This other account has posted this on Truth Social, etc. So all that, what they are doing by reporting on all these, and creating opinion pieces and building blogs and so on, is give sort of a stamp of veracity to the lies that has been shared, on social media by the same people that at the same time kind of control or are behind, the curtains of this pro-government media. And then what they do finally, is to generate again, the social media. This atmosphere will actually pick it up again, what has been said on the legacy media, in order to say, look, you see how we were right on saying that this particular journalist was actually having beers while there was a coup d'etat in 2016 in Istanbul. These messages usually contain vectors. So vectors meaning a specific meme, videos, doctored videos, the use of AI, for example, especially with regard to audio fakes. This is one of the main things that we have identified, that actually it's very difficult, to deal with audio fakes because they are really, really good by now. Way better, for example, than video fakes. They're still, you can see the artificial part of the intelligence there. But with audio deep fakes, it's very complicated as a journalist. The first wave, usually lasts of 24 to 48 hours. So all this wave within the social network and picked up. So the first, cycle, that you see here usually lasts 24 to 48 hours. And what they do in these 24, 48 hours is that they kind of put a tag on a brand on the journalist. They branded, the news independent, the independent news outlet or the journalist as a, for example, British spy or a traitor or a foreign agent, right? They do that, to generate this suffocating atmosphere for the journalist and for the news outlet. That's one. So intimidation. Usually when we're talking about coordinated campaigns, not individual attacks, in some instances we have identified cyber attacks as well. as part of the campaign. While all this is happening on social media, we've also identified legal harassment, the threat of "I'm going to sue you," that even the threat or the mere fact that they are filing a complaint, will be used to discredit, their work. And even though, the judicial process end up in nothing, literally. And then also in the more severe circumstances in physical attacks. But we're talking about the independent, so the intimidation technique, creating this suffocating atmosphere for the journalists and for the news outlet. But this is pretty interesting in your case as well. What we've seen is that these campaigns are not only addressed, against the journalists, so they are not only tagging the journalists, they are also addressed, to the audience of that news outlet or the audience of the journalist. Why? They want to plant the seed of the doubt in the audience of that news outlet or of the journalist. So in that sense, these disinformation campaigns actually target, the general public. How do we tackle this normally? So in IPA, we've been working on these 3 different levels, right? At an individual level. So how do we tackle this? I always forget to add here. How do we tackle this as journalists? So what can we do as journalists? Hola, Albert, ¿qué tal?
Okay, so you can see me now?
We can.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I I got to make this work, so okay, that's it.
Congrats,
Thank you.
everyone. Nice to have you. Nice to have this kind of nice tiles, with faces there.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you
sorry.
very much for switching off, the camera, because sometimes when I do these kind of webinars and workshops and so on, and even with 60 or 70 people there, it's kind of
Sure.
and I only see myself. It's kind of just talking to the webcam, which actually looks very weird. So
Yeah, it's quite some time. Yeah.
it is this, right? So how do we tackle this as journalists, right? So on an individual level, we have a series of, preventive measures, but also recovery measures. So what can we do, to prevent and mitigate, the impact of online harassment on ourselves and the impact of these discrediting campaigns. And then I'll talk about what could be the impact. And then we worked at an organizational level. So we support newsrooms in establishing protocols, because this is extremely important. The first line of defense for most of the journalists is the newsroom, even if they are freelancers. And then we have the general public. And this is probably the most interesting part of what we're going to take a deep dive into this case study, to expose the agenda, driving the attacks and then this information campaign, to protect the integrity of the media. So at an individual level, what we usually do is a training on self-doxing, basically on identifying what are the vulnerabilities, of the journalist's digital footprint. So what we're trying to do is like put the journalists in the shoes of those who wants to target them. And with that, what we've developed, it's sort of a framework, in which, okay, we tell you that ahead of publishing, an investigation, ahead of a electoral period, in the middle of, if you're going to report, in a war zone, if you're going to report in a repressive, environment, please go first of all into your digital footprint and identify what are the potential vulnerabilities. What can they use basically to discredit you? So we go through different search operators. We try to work with them on identifying what are the most sensible pictures of themselves that have been that they've uploaded in the past. Even we go back with them up to 3 years of certain elements, both on Instagram but also on Facebook. The old Facebook, they can pull out photos and pictures from there and present it under false light, meaning this picture, for example, that we worked on a case in Turkey where there were like there was the trolls associated to the pro-government um, um, hacking, pro-government hacking team. Basically, what they did, nothing very sophisticated in terms of IT, right? They just went to the Wayback Machine. They analyzed, and they took up an old picture of that specific journalist, doing an interview with a politician, and then they went to their Facebook and took, a picture of more or less the same time when she was partying, like a personal picture that she actually posted it. And then what they did is they put the two pictures together, they doctored, they put the two pictures together, and then they launch a whole social media campaign against that specific journalist, Jada Karan, because she had reported on the Charlie Hebdo attacks, basically in a column that she wrote for Jomhuriyet, which was at the time, an independent news outlet, one of the most prominent in Turkey, by the way. Now it's a pro-government media, unfortunately. Anyhow, so we try to walk with them through the different, vulnerabilities. We actually ask them also to think out of the box. So for example, here you can see, so that's a couple of screenshots of my sports app. One is the Wahoo, basically the Garmin, social media platform that unless you check, these privacy settings, by default, that information is public. And the same applies to Strava. So by doing that, anyone, can actually have access to my daily or, weekly cycling, routes, and identify where's the starting point. And even if I have the privacy settings, in Strava, that they usually put like they record that the starting point of your cycling route, it's just a few hundred meters away from your actual home, right? Your real address. So even though if someone wants to actually target you physically, they would know where more or less do you live, right? And then also I took this screenshot here. You can see that I have my Spanish phone number there and have my Austrian phone number there. That's actually a personal blog that I haven't been using for the last 10 years. As you can see, that picture, actually, it's not me anymore, but it used to be me when I was young and, well, I want to say ravishing, but no, I was only young at the time. So the part there was, I so much wanted to find a job that I like put my email, I put every personal data I could, to being able to, to receive, any kind of, that anyone could reach me at any moment, anywhere, right? The thing is that that website is still alive. But yeah, so then we developed this kind of protocol. I normally and regularly do trainings with investigative journalists in how to do that, and then we do this kind of exercise together. Pretty interesting results. If you want, I can talk a little bit more about this later on. And then there's the second part. This is the mitigation. This is a screenshot of one of my last documentaries. So what do we do once we have been targeted, right? And then we try to equip trying to equip journalists with sort of a series of analytic, tools in order for them to basically put their journalistic skills into practice to identify what are those threats that they are need to take action, right? And then we kind of walk with them into developing this guide to combat online abuse, sort of personal guide of what do I do in which circumstances, right? Then we work with newsrooms at an organizational level. Remember these three levels: individual, organizational level, and then the last one, the public, the public audience, the general public. Again, we're going to be talking about systems and methodologies. So for the organizational level, we've developed this sort of system or protocol for newsrooms. I'm glad to share with you that some of these measures here that you can see the a protocol that we've developed. Some of these measures have been already implemented in leading news outlets across the world, including the US, including Europe, including certain news outlets in Ukraine as well. And then the general public. And this is where I want to basically stop for a little while. Sorry, give me just 1 minute. Thank you. So decoding, so the last 3 to 4 years, I've been really focused on understanding the patterns of attacks of coordinated disinformation campaigns, right? And what we've been able to identify basically is kind of the main components of a campaign. So we looked into tactics of deployment, we've looked into narratives, we've looked into the actors or the proxies, what are the vectors that we're telling you, and what's the impact on journalists and media organizations. What I want to tell you here is that these are the components, and we've developed a methodology to identify those components. How we present those components to our audience depends very much on storytelling and the way that we want presented. And in this case, video, for example, or any kind of multimedia, product could be a powerful, tool to convey the components of this information campaign. Again, to tell the audience, to tell the students, to be aware to identify these components, because the ultimate targets, of these campaigns are them. So this is where I need your help on how, once we have identified all these components from a research perspective, component two, like tactics of deployment, the TTPs, right? The tactics, techniques, and protocols, the narratives, who are the actors, who are the proxies, basically the actors is who point the finger, and the proxies is who carried out the attack. What are the vectors? We identified all these, how we are going to tell our audience, this. In the case your audience are students, are in different levels, right? So yeah, this is a project that we do together with other organizations. And this is the methodology that we have developed to being able to basically understand to identify the different components, right? So the first step that we do is to try to understand the context. Without context, all the rest of the data that we obtain does not become information. So context is essential. We then analyze the timeline of the attack, right? When we are able to identify, the first instance of the attack, which platforms have been involved in order to disseminate the attacks, and what are the dissemination methods, what vectors that they use, and then we going to identify the actors involved, right? Finally, we kind of pinpoint the narratives, kind of identify what are they saying, So in here, we try to, with these 4 steps, we try to basically respond to the W's of journalism, right? The what, the who, the why, how, the when, the where. We've collected all this into this guide to decoding disinformation. So you can go and visit this guide. It's a step-by-step guide to identify the main components of disinformation narratives. And here we are working on, different case studies. So we've applied this methodology, into understanding, different, into investigating different, disinformation campaigns against news outlets across Europe. The next step is once we have identified narratives, actors, and so on and so forth, what we've done is identify the patterns. Are there common narratives, across Europe? Are there common, profile of actors, also carrying out these attacks against the media across Europe? The answer is yes. So we have developed this observatory of disinformation narratives against the media. You can go and check it if you want, where in these countries, what we have identified is what are the common narratives based on the investigations into these case studies, right? And I'm going to walk you through one of the case studies. But first of all, let me quickly go through three of the most important narratives against the media that actually are gaining traction across, the society and across different segments of the population in different countries in Europe, meaning, what these are the driving forces of polarization. Censors of Ministry of Truth. This is linked to a conspiracy theory, especially this Ministry of Truth, that the concept comes from 1984, George Orwell, right? So this narrative labels journalists and fact checkers as censors or part of the Ministry of Truth, claims that actually journalists are not committed, to show and to, surface facts or evidence, in a transparent manner, but quite the opposite, they are enforcers of an authoritarian agenda that suppresses their free speech, and controls the flow of information. We have identified that basically the main channels, involved into disseminating this narrative in the 7 countries that so far we have investigated in Europe are Telegram, are extremist media, meaning, pro-government, like from 4chan, Getter, Discord, etc. X, Facebook, and these are, the actors or some of the profile of actors that are, disseminating these narratives. Media spread fake news. Media is fake news. This has become one of the most, important tools and wielded, against the media. They undermine traditional values. This is linked to you're a foreign agent, you're a traitor, right? This patriotic trolling, which has a strong gender component. And as I said, traitor and foreign agent, these are linked. I'm not saying that each one of them, of these narratives are completely different from one another. That's why, for example, all of them, are part of broader rhetorics like that has been existing for decades, right? This nationalistic rhetoric, the conspiracy theories, and so on. So they're all this kind of part of these broader rhetorics, but they're somehow, common across Europe. And each one of them, what we have observed through these investigations is that how the extremist leaders or state actors in each one of these countries sort of adopt the narrative and adapt it to their own reality. So it's not the same being called a foreign agent in Romania today that being called a foreign agent in Serbia. The context changes, so that the meaning and the connotation of the wording changes because the context is different, right? And in this case, they basically, both narratives are connected to the fears, the authoritarian past and regimes, the authoritarian regimes in the past in both countries. I want to talk with you about conspiracy theories, and here it's where we're going to walk into, how these conspiracy theories work, how this coordination campaign actually takes place. Do you have any questions now? Do you want me to walk through the case study?
Yes.
Go
I have
ahead.
one question about the previous slides. So as far as I see it from the website, there are like 5 or 6 countries. How did you choose them?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So what we did, first of all, we selected those countries based on the case studies that we wanted to analyze. And those countries are selected with different reasons. One of them is, for example, in the case of Hungary or in the case of Romania and Croatia, it's because there's certain context there that are linked to a pro-Russian influence, right? So we wanted to analyze the pro-Russian influence. We then wanted to, why we selected Germany and Spain? Spain because of the rise of the far right, but also the connections of the far right, with Hungary. So with the Orban party. So we also wanted to understand whether there is a playbook in here. Sorry, the name of the project in general is called Decoding the Disinformation Playbook, right? And the part in Germany, it's precisely because of their past. Wanted to understand is like how and why there is such a sudden rise, of the far right in a country that has been traumatized, that is traumatized, by their past. So we also wanted to analyze that in an isolated way, especially because of the impact, that Germany has across Europe and the influence and the weight, not only across Europe, but I would say that culturally, across the whole world. I mean, because of their past with Nazis, of course. By the way, and to add to your question, to what you said, sorry, have I answered the question?
In a way, yeah. I'm just curious because these topics I think would be really interested also in Turkey, Georgia, in country. I understand that they are not like European countries, but maybe I was just curious why those countries were selected. So
yeah.
That's good.
Okay. Sorry, yeah, that's another context that I should also explain with regard to observatory. If you go to IPI as part of the online harassment and so on, I've conducted a lot of case studies in Turkey, for example. I have not been conducting case studies recently, for example, in Georgia. The only thing is that the funding that we received to conduct, these investigations, kind of limited or constrained as to European Union. So that's why on top of what I just told you, like the journalistic, or the editorial decision behind, why we wanted to understand this specific, context and realities. On top of that, we have the more, let's say, mundane limitation and restriction that the funding was coming from a European institution, so we had to limit our investigations into that. By the way, with regard to that, we are going to be publishing in the next 2 months 7 new in-depth case studies. So the number of countries will also increase. Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions so far? No? Ili? Yeah, Stephen? Yeah, just bye-bye. Sure. Go ahead.
Xavier, like the kind of work, thank you. The kind of work, you're doing. So I wanted to understand what kind of opposition do you tend to receive in sort of being able to do and run, what you guys are doing. At the same time, you know, how do you promote and sort of increase the sort of the overall outreach of your work? As in, like, how are people being more aware of this sort of like positioning of your work? And is it more of a collaborative work, and or is it more like an obstacle in today's age and time?
Wow, very interesting question. All of them basically. Wow, very impressed. So so the first one is what are the obstacles that we
Yeah.
find? Very interesting. Look, the main obstacle, and you will see now why, is the fact that especially X, Facebook, Instagram, there are their APIs and algorithm, very limiting, in terms of data scrubbing. We need data scrubbing basically to understand, how what's the reach of to scan, the different accounts to understand how a message disseminate, through different platforms and different accounts, right? So this is one of the main obstacles, but that that applies to mainly of all kind of investigative journalism carried out on digital environment, right? Which is the limitation also of traceability when we're talking about DNS infrastructures, or like in general, like website infrastructures and technology. But then the other main obstacle that we find is, and this is linked to the work that we do with newsrooms, especially and with individual freelancers, is the fact that nowadays journalists that normally report on attacks against them, because this kind of threats and harassment has become the new normal. And it's our work, but hopefully it's your work actually to let everyone understand that even if you're not a journalist, even if you're just an audience or like a reader, it's not okay to. So yes, it's true, it's the new normal, but no, it shouldn't be a normality. It shouldn't be normal. That's my point. And that actually adds to this kind of sorry, because the last question was very interesting. So how do we do to disseminate this? So I actually need your help on this, because yes, we do publish, through different news outlets. We publish in TADS, we publish in Factograph. Basically, 2 days ago, for example, one of the latest investigations that we will upload in this platform soon, were reported on the front page, of La Stampa in Italy. So we have this reach. The problem here is that when I want to reach a wider audience on social media, I cannot, because by doing that, in some instances, I'm exposing the journalists that are featured as the main protagonists of the case study to further attacks. So, for example, to a point that 2 years ago, when I was like even boosting, paying, paying the dissemination of the case studies, across Instagram. I was paying in Twitter. I was paying, on Facebook, etc. Because we had a budget to do that. I had to cancel within a week all the, promotional efforts that we could, because they were being more targeted. The attacks renewed, against them.
Well, yeah. So you have to continuously find like innovative ways to sort of engage, right, with the audience, and also to educate them.
Exactly.
And so in the near future, like, is like the way the world is moving right now. I mean, and like I am originally from India,
Oh, wow.
and I was
So
born and
then,
raised. Yeah, I was born and raised. So
modern.
you probably understand this a lot more from that context. Since 2014, since the last government is the one in power right now,
Mm-hmm.
um, they've been constant, sort of like there's been a rapid growth of how misinformation has spread.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been like a lot of, you know, opposition to it. Like, and the government goes really heavy on
Mm-hmm.
individuals who tries to oppose to that idea. They've gone to an extent where they have cut down internet and access to internet, and to be able to post or spread anything through WhatsApp and so on, and like so that there is more of misinformation than actually real genuine work or need, which tends to be like the new norm now in the Indian
Mm-hmm.
context, because this has been like over a decade, like 10 plus years, and this is sort of continuing at this point, and people have started to believe on information that is spread through WhatsApp and stuff as real. And so there is a humor and a satire that goes on for people, those who understand what the distinction between fake and real, are also calling it like a WhatsApp university environment.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
pretty much everything that you learn through WhatsApp is like your source of information and knowledge, and people consider it factually correct. So it has emerged and come to that extent now, Xavier. Like, and it's a stressful environment for individual who sort of tries to oppose this at this point. and a constant sort of threat and things going on. In fact, people, those who were in the opposition, their phones were, there's this Israeli software called Pegasus,
Yep.
uh, and they use that software to sort of tap information on as to what's going on into the opposition, who's trying to kind of, you know, what sort of discussions they're having, what sort of plans did they have in terms of trying to go against the government. And then they go really after one after another. And then same with the institution have been shut down in a big, massive way.
Mhm.
Like, with like, so it's more like the might of the institution is greater than actually the real advocacy that goes on the opposition. And that's sort of alarming and concerning and disheartening at the same time. So I don't know. I mean, how this kind of continues to exist. I'm sorry. I'm sounding a bit pessimistic on this opinion, though per se, but I do believe the importance of it. And sort of an environment is also important that it can continue to thrive actually and exist and to be able to kind of educate people. But somehow I feel that that's just dying more and more in the today's age and time.
Look, here we start with thank you very much, Stephen. I completely agree with you in the sense in that pessimism. I'm also quite pessimistic. What I'm presenting here and the how we tackle this as journalists in these three different levels is what can we do as journalists? But of course, like the answer uh, to this, scourge is not shouldn't come only from journalists, right?
Mhm.
Institutions, judiciary, cyber units, and I kind of, yeah, a change of culture as well. So if we're just like in from a philosophical point of view, if you want, one of the areas that really interests me is that so what are the consequences of that? Maybe those consequences of these disinformation campaigns, of the lies spread on WhatsApp, which is extremely powerful tool, both Twitter and WhatsApp, if I'm not mistaken, they're powerful disseminating tools in India, right? I was able to actually interview the editor-in-chief of The Wired, and he's a member of the organization that I work for, the International Press Institute. We're a member-based organization. So I was able to talk to him and so on, and one of the main issues that we find is that um, these disinformation campaigns actually, one of the side, let's put it, effects or consequences that it's having is that it's eroding the definition of key concepts that resides at the center of the fabric of the society.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
those concepts actually are the ones that define the way that we perceive the world and define our values. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, when I was talking here about these narratives, wait, I'm lost again. Here.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we're talking about they are mouthpieces of a global elite, you are censors or you are fake news. Actually, you are censoring had for many decades, and I would say even in Europe, centuries, right? Since the Inquisition in Spain, the Spanish Inquisition had a very distinctive, and precise meaning. That meaning has been, somehow voided, you know, and scrapped away, and and added a new sort of definition. With that resignification, of those concepts, what are doing is, from my point of view, of course, this is just a theory that I would like to investigate more, is how they are, kind of pushing all of us, even those who we don't want to be polarized, you know, to choose environment where we feel more comfortable with the definition of these, of the definition of these key concepts. The problem with that is that um, there's a lack of, so that the public space, this kind of fabric, the arena, the public arena has been broken, and there's no discussion anymore about what is reality and what is not. There's discussion about what is my opinion. My opinion, though perceived from my bubble as the reality, not as an opinion. And for example, one of the worst, things that has happened, especially since 2016, are two things, and both comes from the US. One is facts. Do you remember Kellyanne Conway, first sentence in an interview with the CNN when she was interviewed or questioned about the size of the crowd in Donald Trump's inauguration day in the first one? Well, the journalist was saying, I don't remember who was the presenter. The journalist was questioning Kellyanne Conway, saying, look, you know, the size of the crowd, inauguration day of Barack Obama, is this big, and the picture taken from the same place and so on is that. These are facts. And Kellyanne Conway replied, right, remember, was, well, these are your facts, but there's also alternative facts. Well, that alternative fact opened, like the way of like, wait, those are facts, but I can choose other facts. So the whole, first 4 years of, the US, and basically they had a huge, like, let's say, speakers, right? Like everyone is reporting on what is doing Donald Trump, even here when I open the news in the middle of the Alps, right? So so that started kind of kick off the area of the post-truth, right? The post-truth era. The other one is the coined at the same time by the same actors, not proxies, actors, the instigators, right? Was fake news. Media is fake news. But that concept is very, very interesting because, and it's very unnerving. That's why I never use fake news, when I'm reporting about, this type of attacks, because news by default could never be fake. So the sole definition of a news piece is, data and information verified and presenting the two sides of the story. So news can never have, the adjective in front of it of fake. It could be, like incomplete news story. It could be, everything, but cannot have fake in it. By presenting fake news, you are somehow allowing, giving the sum of veracity of, yes, it could be fake news or could be real news. No, there's no fake news or real news. The concept of news is one. All the rest of the things are opinions, arguments. You can call it whatever you want, but it's not news, So I think that those two concepts have sort of, kind of being a little bit or acted as a seismic, a concept that has kind of further polarized, and I think that we're living in this interregnum, right? Like where the old world, is disappearing. The boundaries of what is, morally right. That everyone knew that most of the countries need to aspire, or all the countries should aspire, to the human rights and democratic values. And suddenly, those lines are not clear anymore. Like the thresholds are being pushed down, pushed up, and blurred. So I don't know. I am very pessimistic, as you're saying. I'm very optimistic in the sense that at least as journalists,
Yeah.
as educators, we can do something. And this is what I want you to take away from today, which is we at least can present what's their agenda.
Mm-hmm.
We can present the narratives. We can present all this and let them, the audience, the students decide what they want to believe, right?
Fair.
And in that sense, I will need your help because one of the things that really interests me is the cases of Finland and Sweden, for example, where they have very, strong media literacy projects, and still the far right, has been increasing and has been raising, has been increasing in terms of support, um, and most of the or significant percentage of the population voting, these extremist parties are basically, young generations in the TikTok generation, right? Do you want me to walk you through very quickly on how we conducted this case study specifically, or do you have any other questions? But honestly, it's absolutely fine for me, yeah, to do both.
Uh, Xavier, I mean, I'm okay either way,
Yeah,
actually. But I'm not sure like how Albert and everyone else in the classroom
exactly.
would want to go about. Yeah.
Ili, how do you feel? Should we continue with the case study and how we conducted this investigation, the methodology, or do you have any questions? Yeah, maybe the connection is wrong. Georgie, sorry.
Sure, I would love to hear more about case studies.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go. Um, I'm going to talk specifically about one case study. Okay, so just to walk you through how, like, the pattern that this life cycle of this information of the coordinated attacks actually, take place, and then we'll talk about Spain. So we're going to talk about conspiracy theories, and this is normally the slide that I show, right? Like, most of the people who think that a conspiracy theorist would be this guy with the tinfoil hat and so on and so forth, right? What happened in the case study that I'm going to show you very quickly is the sustained attack and sabotage activities by a group of conspiracy theorists against this fact-checking organization called Maldita, one of the top fact-checking organizations in Europe, actually, not only in Spain, in 2023, ahead of the elections, the local elections. So they had this project called the Bulobus, Tour Against Disinformation. Bulobus can be kind of translated as hoax pass. And they were doing this media literacy project, which was going, like, I think around, it was a tour of around 20 towns, small towns across, the country, across Spain, in order to help, the local inhabitants, basically the locals, identify hoaxes, identify false news, etc. As I said, all these within the framework of the local elections, to prep to equip the citizens with the tools to identify, fake news, false information, false news, right? The outcome was that there was activity sabotaging, the there were sabotaging acts against, these journalists in the first 10 towns of the itinerary. They were to a point that they were physically blocked, these conspiracy theorists physically blocked the gate of the hotel where the journalists were staying, overnight in this tour, so they couldn't leave. They couldn't actually do these media literacy activities, which means that they actually blocked the access of the population to quality news outlets, to quality information, to a point that they needed police protection. Again, we're talking about Spain. They had to change the dates, and they even had to modify the itinerary. Okay. So what happened? 2020, COVID-19 pandemic. Maldita published this article, like many others. Um, kind of rough translation is, why do we need to vaccinate teenagers against COVID-19, right? So they were talking about, all this. Um, Cut, very filmic, 2023, boom. There is this Maldita, the fact-checking organization, announces the itinerary. We're going to do this project called the hoax bus. We're going to go with a small bus across, 20 towns across Spain, from north to south, east west. So that was on April 10th. Look, this account, Ada Lovelace, that we identified as the seed account, shared screenshots of an article published by Maldita in 2020. We're talking 3 years later, they take this screenshot by quoting on Twitter saying, what are we going to do with them? So that basically was a call to action. So the first step that with how these groups, the first step that these groups take, it's basically identify the target and establish the goal. So the target is Maldita. The goal is what are we going to do with them? Basically a call to intimidate and to attack journalists, right? So this is what happened after, this first account, this first, message saying, what are we going to do with them? So suddenly on Twitter, there was, a huge amount, we're talking about hundreds of attacks against Maldita, death threats against Maldita, to a point that they even had to delete their initial, tweet, because they just didn't want to have it as a sort of a pitfall of, as a pit of hate and death threats and disinformation. So they actually had to remove it entirely because there were like in their citations in the quote, there were hundreds of them. So they didn't want to contribute to that. But still, there were a lot of messages and death threats across Twitter. So the step two, what they do is, they normally rally their troops. So if you are, someone who wants to sabotage and target, journalists, especially when you start on social media, what you do is rally your troops. So we conducted a social network analysis of this Ada Lovelace. Basically, we use this tweet as a sort of the seed account. And we try to identify, what are the network, the ecosystem where this account, like actually lives. And why did we wanted to do that? First of all, because we wanted to identify the most influential actors that were, being part of this campaign, but also we wanted to identify the narratives, what kind of lies and disinformation actually pullulates across this ecosystem. We identified 22,440 accounts linked, in different clusters, linked to Ada Lovelace. Like this is kind of the network where these accounts survived. But we also identified out of these, or analyzed out of these 22,000 accounts, like the timeline when these accounts were created. And then we saw something pretty interesting is that most of these 22,000 accounts, were created in two specific peaks. One is in 2020 during the pandemic. The other one is in 2022, coinciding with the war in Ukraine, with the beginning of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. We also conducted an analysis on around 38,000, instances of tweets from a selection of the 200 most influential accounts of these 22,000 to identify sort of content analysis, the most frequent words grouped by topics and narratives, right? So here we can start to, it was like kind of a first scanning, or scan of what was the content, being narrated, being distributed there, right? So we had this COVID, vaccines. So topic number 2 was linked to basically, all this anti-vaccine movement. Then, yeah, topic number 5, there was already hoaxes. Putin is mentioned several times. News, censorship, censura. So there's our topic number 6. This is more local, more contextual. España, Sanchez, those living in Barcelona, they know all these issues against the Sanchismo, Perrismo, etc., etc. So there's a sustained campaign that anything that is aligned to or perceived to be close to the ideology of the government is considered, to be an unpatriotic, for example, a traitor. But then what we did is we did this analysis of using the eigenvectors and centrality. If you are interested about it, it's a specific algorithm used in social network analysis to understand which are the accounts that has, the biggest weight within a network, the ones that are more influential. So what we gathered here is like the 50 most influential accounts. And what you can see here is that out of these accounts, we identified that those highlighted in red, we identified that they also have Telegram channels with the same name. And why Telegram is important? Again, we're seeing now how suddenly the Telegram app, social media platform opens up. So because we're also interested in seeing and investigating how the narratives, and the death threats actually went from a more public, like reaching a wide audience, such, Twitter, to a more like somehow encapsulated channels, a more private ecosystem. How the false information and disinformation actually navigates, through different platforms. So based on these analysis, so we identified these actors, we take a deep dive into who is, each one of these most influential actors. We identified that in these instances, they had also Telegram accounts. So we did an analysis of the Telegram accounts to a point that we identified that some of these Telegram accounts created a Telegram channel called Where is the Hoax Pass, where they were actually creating, sharing the next stop of the itinerary and of the hoax pass of the journalists into the different towns, and coordinating, and calling, to the members of different conspiracy groups that were nearby the location, that specific location, to actually go, and sabotage the activities. So the step 3 is they use Telegram channels in this case to coordinate and accomplish, the goals, which is sabotage and intimidation. This is some of the examples because they were recording it. They were using, they were taking pictures. They were using, because first for 2 things. One, they were using it as vectors, meaning as way to further disseminate the false information, using video, most of them, and images. But also, and the second is that they wanted to show the rest of the members of their conspiracy groups, of these 11 Telegram channels, that it was totally fine, to actually go and sabotage them, that nothing will happen to them, so that they could do it with complete impunity. So the step 4 is step 1, identify the target. Step 2, rally your troops. Step 3, coordinate. Step 4, execute. Step 5, discredit. Use, the content and the material that you've produced, during the execution of the sabotage of their activities to discredit. And here, sorry, I didn't tell you that. And for the social network analysis, we use tools called Kibo Technologies. And for the smear campaigns, this is not a social network analysis. Social network analysis is just connecting different, accounts. This is a narrative networks. We used and we partnered with the computer engineering department at UCLA, that they've developed this tool called Story Miner. Story Miner, what they do is like kind of identify like what is the central topic of a huge amount of text, of um, instances, of messages, posts, and everything. What is the central topic, for example, Spain, and then, what are the false narratives being, spread across or being said, in this case, these 11 Telegram channels about this specific topic. So in this smear campaign, what we identified, for example, was several accounts, disseminating false information against, the Maldita and against this news outlet. So portraying them as part of, being the mouthpieces of the political power. In this case, you can see in this diagram that the PSOE, which is the Socialist Party, which is like the party in the government, how they are mouthpieces of them. Or then later on, they were saying that Maldita was receiving funding, from dubious, well, they call it like mainstream, from this elite power, right? This elite from the US, Ashoka, from the FCN, even from us, from the International Press Institute, etc., or from George Soros Foundation. So they are Ministry of Truth and its censors, right? And here it's very, very interesting. The weaponization of your channels, of the channels, is that what we did was kind of an analysis of the performance of the disinformation narratives being spread in that amount. What I didn't say is that the 11 Telegram channels that we analyzed, again, they're all Spanish channels. So you can see that the type of narratives that are being said here, are narratives of disinformation, false conspiracy theories, most of them or a lot of them coming from the US. Again, disseminated in Spanish Telegram channels. And what we analyzed was 18 months, so we scrapped basically all the data from these Telegram channels in the last 18 months. We reached around 1 million messages in total. The narratives so what we can see is that here is that in the last month specifically, at the same time that the narrative against, the hoax bus, the bulletproofs that you can see there in purple, highlighted, was peaking, also was peaking other kind of disinformation like deep state, pedophiles, etc., etc., in the same channels, right? So how they use the same channels not only to disseminate attacks, other conspiracy theories like the deep state, pedophiles, CIA involved, and so on. On top of that, using the same streams, to also further disseminate the attacks against the hoax bus. So this is how we normally conduct these cases, right? These case studies. All these we put it on the observatory, and we do all these things. First, questions. If you have any questions, happy to talk about methodology and everything. Second, and probably most important for me as well, is like, okay, so help me and how to basically build something from these analysis, from these conclusions, that could help the audience understand how these narratives work. Because at the end of the day, what I want is journalists to conduct these investigations, to tell their audience how the bad actors are working, so they are somehow as a way to inoculate them against, the disinformation. So I need your help here. How would you actually package? What did you produce out of here to reach this general public with this content, to inoculate them against these campaigns? And also on top of that, if you guys have any questions, of course. Lily, I don't know, you've been following up. Do you have any questions? How can you help me? How would you package this into reaching a wider audience?
Um, let me. Before answer it, I will talk about the situation in China. I'm not sure if you know CCTV news.
Yeah, I do. I have some friends working in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, we can get some abroad news because the network look up. For example, we had to find other ways to get a VPN and to see it on the news. And in China, a famous thing is about if you watch CCTV news, you will be very happy because in CCTV news everything is about the channel is very good, and we can see the news from CCTV, but from the internet such as Weibo, Renault or Douyin, TikTok, we can get some bad news. Um, but actually, I I have one question
Go
from
ahead. Yeah.
myself. From myself, you know, I have children. As a mother, uh, I'm afraid to see the bad news about the children. You know, I in some periods I'm pessimistic because I see some bad news about children is hurted, uh, or school bullying, anything else. So I talk with my friends. So ask her how to confront it. She told me, if the news makes you pessimistic, the best way is you ignore. Her meaning is that she encouraged me not to say the bad news about anything about children. Um, and so I don't know how to confront it about the
Mhm.
bad news.
Well, that's I need I'm not the best person or I'm not equipped to answer that question, unfortunately, because my work it's about telling and reporting on bad news. But maybe both Stefan and Georgie can actually contribute here, or maybe they have any idea about it based on the work that they do also.
I have, I would say, a very particular opinion, but also, well, let's say I don't know how to answer your question, Javier, because I do believe that the things that we are talking about right now are not easily perceived by general audience,
Mhm.
because the whole propaganda thing and, many of the different concepts, um, including spiral of silence,
Mhm.
this is very applicable to this story. So I would probably start with people who are just begin, I would say they're like, I don't want to say like life, but media presence
Mhm.
with kids and students and people like that, and try to educate them that there are, it's a double-edged sword or something like that, just to explain things in a very plain terms. But as for general audience, especially for audience who, let's say, a little bit older than, digital natives, or somehow people who got their devices in their young age, I think it would be simply very, very difficult or either impossible, to tell those things, because I often think about, when I hear topics like this, I often think about my parents, for example, or my, grandparents, who are really old people, and
Mhm.
they are very committed to the kind of media they used to consume and they consume now. And it's a very, propaganda, let's say, propagandistic and propaganda-rich media, and they cannot change their perspective. Even if you explain, look, there are different other options, there are better journalism and stuff like that, and this has how people suffer, journalism in general, or journalists, and they just don't understand. So I would probably focus on younger generation and just try to explain it like simple bits and pieces. I don't
Mhm.
know, even in the form of some kind of a storytelling podcast. I don't know, just
Mhm.
just to try to give them a hint of what may happen, or
Mhm.
what's happening. That would be
Mhm.
great, I think. But I'm very pessimistic here right now.
No, but how we use these storytelling techniques, it's very interesting, and how this storytelling it's actually brought to the audience in a specific format. So you were saying about podcasts, right? And because podcast and radio in general, it's great because it's also a very intimate experience,
Yes.
right? It's like you with the audience, and it feels like someone is talking to you. Well, one of the things that it's very interesting about this with regard to storytelling is the psychological aspect of these conspiracy theories and the wording that we've been talking, right? Censors, Ministry of Truth, and so on, that actually gives the impression to those who believe in them, who are part of this bubble, and we are all susceptible to be in that bubble. So please, and also because I will tell you about a personal experience when I strongly believe that actually Kamala Harris had a real chance to win the elections in the US, because my what YouTube was offering me, in my algorithm was all the time the Daily Show and CNN and and MSNBC and so on. So I also got into this bubble, kind of a different loophole, but it got into this bubble. But anyhow, so what building a narrative in which Kamala Harris was actually, a real, a contestant against Donald Trump in the elections. Which actually brings me to this specific the importance of storytelling, especially in this Ministry of Truth, conspiracy theories, and so on. It's like they're giving the audience a very powerful narrative in which they are, a David against a Goliath, and that they have the duty to tell the rest, that they are wrong and they need to find a bigger power. That's extremely, extremely strong, narrative that we journalists have not been able to fight back for many reasons. One, because we became like very complacent with ourselves, and this is the way that we do journalism. But also because of that, because sometimes when adding too much subjectivity to content, to a piece of work that to our work that aims at presenting facts and evidence within a context, right? To give the people information, then we're limited, we're constrained, by our code of conduct at the same time. So it's a lose-lose situation. Let's put it this way. It's not a win-win situation, right? So
Mm.
that's why, how would you tackle this? I mean, from a media literacy perspective, and as you're saying, completely agree with you. And
Yeah. But there's another question that just popped up in my mind, is
yeah,
that there is probably no universal solution in terms of language and region and stuff like that. So you have to every time tailor it to like a specific audience.
that's good.
And I would say it's another very difficult level and another very difficult thing to solve. Even like speaking of like this podcast or any kind of storytelling that we are talking about, we will always have to like tailor it. And I think this is also very, very difficult because if you don't speak the same language, for example, I don't know, like you're English and you produce this in English and then you translate it in Spanish and it can be different. And if you don't speak Spanish, you can check it if it was delivered in the same way. So I think it's just like a very multi-layered problem. And I think I mean, it's beautiful that you work and trying to solve those things, but I think every second we spend in this loop more and more, it gets difficult and even more difficult.
No, but I actually like it. It's to really land these, as I said, the idea of these methodologies to identify these components, how as a journalist you actually tell the story. That really depends on if you are working for RTV, that type of channel, the type of content that you produce and so on. But what I find interesting is that it's not only, adapting to this content to make it engaging, but it's also speak landing these theoretical aspects to the specific reality and context that actually a younger audience, for example, could actually feel that it has an impact on them, right?
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So it's not only the language, it's also the language of the age, let's put it this way, right? They're very, very interesting. Thank you, Georgie. I have 5 minutes left, Stephen, but I really, really want to hear you as
Okay.
well.
So going back to Lily's point, Lily, I think one of the things you can do is, like, as a mother, you can decide as long as you want to protect your child from that information. But at the same time, you can introduce them to different forms of media, knowledge, access to understanding, question, reasoning, things like that. It will really help them grow as a thinking individual. Because up till the age of 5, their 50% of the brain will develop, and the way they will basically process and receive information, and it will be a task for you in that sense. Xavier, I feel like, I like the fact, like, when sometimes when there's an opposition to it, like, my mind goes to non-alignment in certain ways, but also non-violence as a tactical sort of position generally. With government, it's so hard to kind of compete, or like with forces, which tends to be opposition generally. Like, if I had to sort of, really, you mentioned about collaborating with the senior editor with at the Wire, something like a collaboration, a concoction, sort of collaboration with different like sort of anti-establishment sort of media groups. Um, but rather than they be perceived as anti-establishment, which is like a popular sentiment, because what Georgie mentioned about people who like to believe in the traditional form of media education, or the access to that education, tends to kind of have their biases. So it's sort of difficult to even break those biases of those individuals. So rather than opposing the whole identity of saying that we are in favor of positioning this information to you, I would rather position myself as a friend of the government, and a friend of the government who is doing exactly what we should be doing, is to provide information, what the government want us to do. And that's where we are sort of positioning ourselves, rather than seeing but and that just boggles the minds of people, in the sense that, okay, this guy's not coming as an opposition or as an anti, but rather, trying to position everything in a way that is to educate people, is to make them aware, and so on. And
Mm.
that will sort of, will really help in building a new narrative, rather than opposing the whole thing altogether. So
So
that
we're
way,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So we're not opposing sorry, just for me to understand, we're not opposing the government. We
yeah,
are, in fact, by doing our
supporting.
job, supporting the democratic institutions that actually sustain the government, that
Absolutely.
sustain. Interesting.
So, and that sort of a positive narrative should continue, because people like, and then you can say, what, like, our friends at the other side are somehow not agreeing with us, but this is important. Like, we really want you to kind of know this.
Mm-hmm.
This has happened. We're sort of upset with our friends in a certain way to not really support us in it. And that sort of positioning, of non-violence, so to say, or that positioning of how to sort of take this forward, will make a lot of difference, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's super hard to fight institutions when you have to sort of put that thing together, like, to get to that stage. So it's more like a political tactical sort of positioning towards it.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of food for thought. So thank you very much, Stephen. And Lily and Georgie, I just wanted to say thank you. Unfortunately, my time is over. I need to cut off here. I would definitely continue, definitely another couple of hours for sure. Um, Thank you very much to all of you. I really hope that that what I presented today, and the work that we do in APIs somehow offers you also some food for thought in terms of methodology, what it's important, what can we apply from this to our work, um, to also our dissertation, to the methodologies that we are developing, what are actors, what are narratives, how we convey all this message. So yeah, hopefully it goes beyond the content of the false narrative. It's also the whole system and infrastructure behind it, right? That also it's worth, talking to our students and talking to our audience and talking to our children as well. So it's not only about the content, but also who is behind it and what's the purpose and the agenda, and why do you want why they want you to believe certain things. So hopefully this was useful, and I really look forward to seeing, you again at some point, to cross paths, and also I will check with Albert and the team at the cabinet to see how's the dissertations going on. All the best for the dissertation. Trust me, I know I've been there, done that. It's a stressful moment. All the best on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. I just want to thank you, all of you, also for your participation.
Mm-hmm.
To you, Javier, for dedicating this short time this afternoon, and congratulate you for your work, all of your work in IPI. And
Thank you.
yeah, it was truly an interesting and really useful session for what
Mm-hmm.
I think. And that's all. I think we're going to end the conversation today here. But yeah, I look forward to continue maybe sometime and to welcome you to next year in the same course, hopefully. And I don't know, guys, if you want to share any final thoughts, any final questions, anything you'd like to say before we close the session today. Could be maybe about the final work you have to, the final project you have to deliver tomorrow or anything. If not, just to thank you again for your time today, and we see you, I think, in a couple weeks. So thank you again, guys. Thank you, Javier, and we'll be in
Thank you.
touch by May.
Thanks, Albert.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Xavier.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Bye.
guys. Enjoy
Bye.
the
Take
rest
care.
of your
Have a
Bye
afternoon.
bye.
Bye bye.